Welcome to The Explainer. So, when you think of Tasmania, what comes to mind? Probably this pristine, wild, natural paradise, right? But it's also a place buzzing with modern industry. It's this incredible island of deep contrasts, and today, we're going to dig into what that really means for the people who actually live there.
The story of Tasmania so often begins with a dream. It's this promise of a simpler, better life, kind of like what you see right here. It's the kind of thing you'd find in a glossy tourism brochure or a tempting property listing.
And wow, it's a powerful image, right? A vision of escape, of pure beauty. But, as is usually the case, there's always a whole lot more going on just beneath that pristine surface. So, to really get a handle on this, let's start by looking at how this whole dynamic plays out in two very different Tasmanian towns.
Okay, a tale of two towns, the promise versus the reality. To really get a feel for modern Tasmania, we're going to compare the fortunes of two places on opposite ends of the island. And trust me, their stories tell you pretty much everything you need to know about the incredible promise and the persistent problems of life here.
So, on one hand, you've got Strahan, way out on the remote west coast. The town was basically promised a future built on ecotourism. And then, on the other hand, near the capital Hobart, you have Brighton, and it is absolutely booming as an industrial hub. We're talking two towns, two completely different paths.
So let's talk about Strahan. You might remember the huge Franklin Dam protests back in the 80s. Well, after that, ecotourism was basically sold as Strahan's salvation, its sustainable future. The whole idea was to pivot away from the old industries like logging and mining and instead lean into conservation. The plan? Turned the entire town into a kind of single corporate-owned tourist destination, built entirely around its absolutely breathtaking natural beauty.
And hey, on paper, it looks like a massive success. I mean, just look at these visitor numbers. The tourists are definitely showing up by the hundreds of thousands. But, and this is a big but, these numbers really don't tell the whole story. For the people who actually live in Strahan year-round, the reality on the ground is, well, it's a whole lot different. So here's the problem. A huge chunk of the money from all that tourism, it just doesn't stay in the community. A lot of the jobs go to what they call a drive-in, drive-out workforce. People who come into town for their shifts, but actually live somewhere else. So you've got this weird situation where the tourist industry is growing, but essential local services, things like the high school, decent healthcare, they've actually declined. And it's led to this real fragmentation, a breakdown in the town's community fabric. Okay, now let's completely switch gears. We're going to head across the island to Brighton, just a bit north of Hobart. And here we see a totally different picture emerging. This isn't a story about tourism, it's a story driven by transport and industry. Brighton is just booming. Thanks to some really strategic investment in infrastructure from the government and local council, the place has just taken off. We're talking the fastest growing population in the whole state, the youngest median age, and an economy that's surging. There's this genuine sense of progress and opportunity in the air there. It's a real success story. Right, so the price of paradise, the fine print on the dream, this whole contrast, between the glossy promise and the much more complex reality, it isn't just about the towns. It also applies to that dream so many people have of owning their own little piece of Tasmanian paradise. Okay, so picture this. You're scrolling through real estate listings, and then you see it. Offers over $15,000 for a block of land in the wild West Coast. I mean, come on. That sounds like the perfect, affordable escape, doesn't it? Well, you know what they say. If it sounds too good to be true, there's always a catch. And here it is. That super cheap price, it's because this blank canvas comes with, well, nothing. No town water, no sewer, no stormwater. You'd have to pay for all of that yourself. And that's before you even start trying to navigate the maze of legal hurdles and serious environmental risks, like the fact that it's in a bushfire-prone area, just to get permission to build anything at all. So, yeah, that dream of a cheap block of land, it often means no services, a whole bunch of complex legal challenges, and some pretty significant hidden costs. And this gap, this huge gap between the advertised dream and the practical, often super expensive reality, it's a theme you see again and again across Tasmania. And it's creating some serious underlying tension. So, a contested heritage, not just one Tasmania. And listen, these tensions we're talking about, they aren't just about money or development. They also bubble up in how the land is actually used, and, maybe even more importantly, in the fight over whose history and whose heritage gets to be officially recognized. I mean, just take a look at this recreational trail. On the surface, it's a beautiful spot, a place for everyone to get out and enjoy nature. But if you look closer, it's actually a low-key battleground. You've got walkers, horse riders, and mountain bikers all trying to share the same narrow space. And, well, it gets complicated. Everyone's just trying to stay safe and not get in each other's way. But honestly, these smaller, everyday conflicts, they're really just the tip of the iceberg. Because there are much deeper and way more profound divisions simmering within Tasmania's Aboriginal community. And it all comes down to this really fundamental question: who gets to speak for their history and their heritage?
Okay, to really get a handle on this conflict, there's a key term you need to know, and that's Palawa. It's a term used for Tasmanian Aboriginal people, and it's often associated with the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, or TAC. And the TAC is important because it's the official body that's recognized by the state government as the peak representative group.
But that very official recognition, that's right at the heart of this dispute. One of the sources we looked at, which represents the Liaputa people, makes the incredibly strong argument you can see right here. They claim that this group, the Palawa, has been allowed to form a dictatorship for a minority, and that they now control who can and cannot access services or be recognized as an Aboriginal person in Tasmania. So from this viewpoint, the claim is that the TAC uses a very limited definition of Aboriginality, one that's based on specific families, and that this process excludes many other Aboriginal people. They also allege that the TAC controls access to funding and even has a say over heritage sites where they have no direct ancestral link. So this isn't just some minor disagreement, it's a deep, profound conflict over identity, history, and power. It really shows that Tasmania's heritage is itself a very contested space.
Okay, so we've looked at all these different pieces of the Tasmanian puzzle, from its towns to its land sales to its history. What's the big takeaway? What should we make of all this?
Well, I think the key takeaway is this. Tasmania is not one single thing. It's not a monolith. It's a really dynamic, incredibly complex island that's defined by all these powerful coexisting tensions. You've got promise versus reality, growth versus decline, conservation versus development, and this idea of a shared heritage versus a really contested identity. Look, the future of Tasmania is being written right now, in these very contrasts. And it leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? How does a place like this protect its incredibly precious past, while at the same time build a fair and prosperous future for all of its people? Finding the answer to that, well, that's what's going to shape this incredible island for generations to come.